Thanks for joining us. It's I believe the first RSM webinar of the new year. So happy New Year to everyone. Welcome back. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Laura Orcott. So I'm an associate director for HSE Recruitment. HSE Recruitment does very much what it says on the tin. We're a health and safety recruitment company. So we've been going for 22 years, and myself, I've been working there for 15 years. Now, the reason I'm here talking to you about the power of diverse thinking today. So, obviously the day job for the last 15 years has been recruiting health and safety professionals. But everything that we do at HC Recruitment is really, really powered by data and by diversity. Those are two of our really key pillars. And I personally am very, very interested in the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I sit on our sort of Thrive committees internally to drive this sort of stuff for us. So it's a really, really key topic for me, and one that we've done a lot of research into over the years. So today we're going to go through quite a few bits in the hour. Obviously we don't have a huge amount of time, so it's a bit of a quick run through. If you have questions on anything as we're going through, as we mentioned, please throw them into the chat and we can answer those at the end. Or you're more than welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn or email or anything like that, and send me some questions afterwards if you want to continue the chat after the webinar. So, diversity and inclusion, an overview. So today what I thought we'd go through is firstly, just what are the facts at the moment about diversity within the health and safety industry, because I believe you can't know where we need to go until we know where we are, and data is a hugely important part of that. So yeah, we'll go over some of the facts around D&I in the safety industry. We'll talk a little bit about why we care, and that's very much that sort of boardroom to bottom line piece, outside of the morality of it. Why do we care? Why do businesses care about this? How do we get our businesses to care about this? Thirdly, we're then going to talk a little bit about how you hire fairly. So, how do we make sure that we're actually attracting the right people, that our interview processes and things like that are really, really fair and equitable. We're going to talk about some of the issues we might face internally at our companies from a D&I perspective. And then lastly, we're going to talk about maybe some of the issues that we might put on ourselves when it comes to D&I. So as you can see, loads to get through in this next hour. So yeah, please interact, send me your questions. I'm willing to answer as much as possible, within reason. So let's kick it off with what are the facts about diversity within the health and safety industry. Now, like I said, one of our key pillars, or two of our key pillars, are data and diversity at HC Recruitment. So we very regularly go out and do research projects on D&I and what's happening in the industry. So every year we release a remuneration report that looks at the different salary levels for different roles, from advisor through to sort of director. We look at how that's affected by industry. We look at how that's affected by where you live. And we look at the diversity stats that go along with that, so that we can really get a clear picture of what's happening in the industry. So I thought to start off with, I'd share a few of those facts with you. So one small caveat, this data is the 2024 data. We're currently collating our 2025 data, and that's going to be released at the end of January, start of February. So again, if you want a copy of that information, that remuneration report and the diversity stats, drop me a message and we can send that across. But the numbers are quite similar to what we saw last year and what I'm sharing here now. So the first thing I'm showing you here is health and safety advisor and the diversity stats for that sort of level. So advisor tends to be anywhere from 0 to about 5 years experience, tends to be people at NEBOSH certificate level. And as you can see from the age range there, it tends to skew younger in the advisor level, up to sort of like 34. These stats come from, as I said, our remuneration report, where we have interviewed at around 2,000 people in the profession. So we've got a pretty good sample size here of what's going on in the industry. And what we found is the stats aren't that bad at advisor level. So this is good news, actually, at the bottom end of the market. You can see that at advisor level, it's sort of 68% white British, 92% without disabilities. You've got about 91% that are heterosexual or identify as heterosexual, and 61% male. So the good news here is at this level, the advisor level, we're definitely doing something right. You know, these numbers tend to track the census data. It's not too far off what the UK census data tells us. So, for example, the latest UK census data says that it's about 3.2% of the UK that identifies as LGBTQIA. And you can see that actually we've got a slightly higher percentage of LGBTQIA at advisor level. So good news to start off with. We're doing stuff right at advisor level. This isn't really a surprise to us, you know, because at this sort of entry level, we know people are doing a lot of work around D&I. We know that people are trying to address the way that they hire, the way that they create their cultures. We know that Gen Z are a little bit more open to sharing this sort of data. So this isn't really a surprise for us at kind of advisor level. And I think it's pretty representative of the UK as a whole. So good work at this end of the market. The next one I'm going to show you is the manager level. And basically what you're going to see now as we go through manager to head of to senior is that the numbers tend to shrink a little bit as we kind of go through. So here at manager level, you've got about 77% white British, you've got 92% with no disability, 96% heterosexual, 74% male. So not massively different from advisor, but definitely there's more men to women. That data is quite out. I mean, again, if you look at the census data, it's sort of it's almost exactly 50-50, the UK census data on female to male. So it's definitely skewing very male at manager level. And again, the other numbers are starting to rise, and the diversity numbers are starting to go down. The age range changes a little bit here as well. You know, so manager, we tend to say this is when people start to be looking at diploma, they start to have that 4 to 7 years experience, that kind of range. And yeah, the numbers are starting to shift a little bit. Looking at the head of stats, again, going in the same sort of direction. So 87% white British, 88% no disability, 95% heterosexual, 86% male. So again, you can see the male-female thing is definitely getting more and more skewed as we go further up the chain. And for director level, yeah, you can see some of the stats then. 79% white British, 96% no disability, 98% heterosexual, 88% male. So although we started off quite well at the advisor level, you know, so we're doing things right when we're bringing in new people to the industry. It's not really sort of trickling through at the moment to the senior levels. We're finding that still, you know, particularly at a director level, it's very sort of, as we would have expected 10, 15 years ago, very white British male. That's kind of the way it's skewing there. And not that there's anything necessarily bad with that, but there's definitely a difference between that seniority of roles and the diversity stats. So the thing is, there is some good news in here. Like we said, you know, it looks as though at the junior level, we're tracking above the census levels. There's a real shift at that end of the market. And to be honest, the difference in all of these stats is huge from 10 years ago. Absolutely huge. I mean, they were completely skewed, particularly in the male to female range 10 years ago. So we've made progress. But what we can absolutely see is there's definitely still issues with women and minority groups climbing the ladder. You know, the more senior you go, the numbers start to slip a bit. Like we said, particularly that gender mix. So there's definitely seems to be a bit of a block in diverse people from climbing that professional ladder in the safety industry. Again, I know there's quite a lot of stats on here. So if you want copies of these, just reach out and we can send them out. And like I said, the newer version of the stats will be coming out in a couple of weeks as well. So that's kind of the facts as an overview. But why do we even care about this? Why does it matter? Why is this something that we're looking at? Why are we measuring the numbers of men to women and all of that sort of stuff? And we get asked this all of the time. So I've included a couple of links here, and I believe that the slides are going to get sent out to you afterwards. But these are quite easily searchable on Google if you want to take a look at them. But the top link here is a McKinsey study from a couple of years ago. And this McKinsey study basically found that companies that were in the top quartile for gender diversity on their executive teams were actually 25% more likely to have above average profitability. So in layman's terms, basically the executive teams that had a better split of men to women and had more diverse executive teams were actually more profitable than their nearest competitors by 25%. That's quite a big number. You know, that's not just a couple of points in it. That's a big jump. And actually what they found was the greater the representation, the higher that number went. So the more diversity that was on that board, the profitability numbers went up and up and up. And what's really interesting about this, I think, as well, is this wasn't just about gender diversity. You know, they found on this McKinsey report that when you branched out from gender diversity to, you know, having more ethnically diverse executive teams, that actually increased profitability by 36% in most cases. So these are really big numbers in terms of profitability for your company. And I think it's quite interesting. I was at a conference a few weeks ago where we were talking about health and safety, obviously, and someone said, look, you know, we can't say that safety is our key priority. We can say it's a key value for us, but we can't say it's a key priority because the key priority for businesses is to be profitable, to remain in business. And I think that's probably true of diversity as well. You know, we can say that it's a key value of a company, but in reality, you know, a company's number one priority is to be profitable so that they stay in business. So I think these stats are really useful when you're talking about diversity and inclusion, you know, to your executive boards, because even if your company doesn't want to consider, you know, the moral implications of ignoring diversity in the workplace, it's almost impossible to ignore it from a commercial point of view. You know, the bottom line, looking at these stats, and, you know, the McKinsey report is just one of many research papers that have been done on this topic. The bottom line is, if your company wants to still be in business in 10 years' time and still wants to be competitive and outperforming your competitors, you have to look at diversity and inclusion. That's the absolute bottom line there. So we find that these sorts of stats are really useful sometimes for, you know, for our clients when they want to talk about D&I, because they're talking money, which is what the CEO tends to care about at the end of the day. And to be honest, I think when you look at those numbers and you try and think about the reasoning behind it, it actually becomes quite obvious why that would be the case. You know, if you hire 10 clones, for example, for your executive team, and they're all from the exact same background, they're all from the same culture, they've all done the same qualifications, they've all gone the same route in their career, they tend to think very similarly. They're going to have very similar outlooks. So what happens then is you get 10 ideas that are kind of all the same from your executive board. You're not getting any diversity of thinking there. So again, if you're looking to stay sort of cutting edge and stay ahead of the competition, you need to have those fresh ideas and you need to have that fresh perspective on your executive board. And that's something that diverse hires massively helps with. So again, take the morality out of it and the fact that it's just the right thing to do, and it just makes good business sense to look at diversity, particularly at the senior end of the market, you know, on your executive teams. And I think when we think about this in relation to the health and safety industry, right, which has very long been quite a male-dominated industry, we found that there was a skill shortage in the safety market. There were more professionals retiring than there were entering the market. So it was really important that actually we looked at these diverse pools of talent and we started thinking outside the box, and we started hiring talent from different walks of life and different areas, because if we tried to just recruit the same thing that we've always recruited, we were going to run out of people, basically. And I think this message, like we said, is starting to sink in at that junior end, you know, that we are recruiting better, we are recruiting more diversity at the junior end, but those executive teams, which is where the profitability aspect comes in and that competitive edge comes in, there's still some way to go. There's another couple of links on there as well for you to look at, but this PwC link is another really good one for some statistics for you. So PwC a few years ago, they created this driving social mobility report, and that's what this links to. And what this report did is it looked at what different groups of people saw as their biggest barriers to progression in their career and in their employment. And it's quite interesting what it came out with, because different groups of people, different genders, diversities, age ranges, they do think very differently about these things. So what the PwC report showed is that the older age group, so they were looking at the 55 years and above, they generally thought that the biggest the biggest barrier to them in their career would be having a lack of education or a lack of qualifications. Whereas when we looked at that junior level, those 18 to 34-year-olds, their main concern were diversity issues. Their main concern were that their ethnicity might be a barrier, or their gender might be a barrier, or their disability might be a barrier. So I definitely, when we're looking at hiring into the industry, there is a genuine feeling that sometimes things out of their control can hamper their career. So it's really, really important, again, as a health and safety industry, that we talk about this and we show that we are an industry that is very open to diversity. We're open to diverse thinkings, and we welcome people from all different walks of life, because that is a really, really big concern for them at the junior end of the market as well. So you can see this, although, we're doing better at the junior end of the market, this stuff touches at all levels, from advisor through to director. It's important for every single level within the safety industry. So there's a little bit about why we care. Hopefully, you know why we should care from a moral perspective, but that's just a little bit for your sort of your boards, your commercial aspect of it. So the next thing that I kind of wanted to go through is just about how we actually look at hiring fairly, because this question comes up a lot for us in recruitment. We have companies that approach us all the time saying, we really want to increase our diversity in numbers. We're absolutely on board. We understand all the reasons why we should do it, both ethically and commercially. We are on board. We want more diverse groups of people, but we can't get them. And usually that's because of the way that you're recruiting, right? There are many, many barriers to diverse people in the traditional ways of recruitment that we've used for years and years and years. So there's things that we can do to try and affect that as well. So one thing that companies have been looking at is the idea of blind hires, right? So this isn't necessarily a new thing. Quite a few companies previously have tried taking names off CVs entirely, in order to try and get rid of that unconscious bias that some people may have in the hiring process. And that does help, removing names. It does remove a lot of sort of gender or ethnicity markers, but it isn't always enough to just take the names off people's CVs, because in all honesty, it's quite easy to gauge things from people's CVs. Even when they're sort of anonymized a little bit, you can kind of see where someone went to school. So you've got an idea of the area they grew up. You can see, again, what year they graduated. So you can have a rough idea of probably how old they are. You can look at certain ways of writing, certain styles of writing, which can indicate gender. There's loads of things that kind of give us away on our CVs. So a new sort of school of thought, well, I say new school of thought, it's been around for a couple of years, but there's not many people doing it at the moment. But one way that we're sort of encouraging and suggesting people look at trying to take bias out of their recruitment is to get rid of CVs altogether. Which sounds bold. I know this sounds like a really, really big step, but it makes a lot of sense. And actually it's something that has been proven through a couple of projects. So a few years ago, I know that HS2 tried this. They had a project that they pioneered a number of years ago where they completely took CVs out of the question entirely. And what they did is they focused on competencies. So, for example, for a health and safety role that, say, perhaps it required someone to build an engaging culture, instead of asking for someone's CV, they asked that question. They said, for your application, can you tell us or give us an example of a time where you have developed a safety culture? So basically, very similar to the sort of things you would ask at interview. When you get to an interview stage, that's when the competencies come into it, and it's very much about what you've done previously. So they started asking that at application stage. And that way, what they were doing is not taking into account any of those, defining characteristics that might be given away by a CV, by a name, or, or anything like that. So, it discounted people's qualifications. It discounted their gender. It discounted their ethnicity, their sexuality. It really focused on what they could do and whether they could do the job. Which I think is a really, really interesting way of looking at this. And, anecdotally from the conversations we had with their director of E&I at the time, their number of diverse hires actually increased during the program. So it really showed that actually taking that conscious and unconscious bias out of the hiring process had a really immediate and genuine impact. So it's a bold choice. It's not one that all companies are ready for. I think, companies are very reliant on CVs at the moment. But for example, it's something that we probably do a lot more, when a company is using an agency like ourselves. We do have people's CVs and we have access to those, but we competency interview people. That's the kind of the application process for us when we're trying to shortlist someone for a client. And then when we speak to the client, we present the shortlist. It tends to not be about their CVs. It's about the person. It's about what they can do, so we sort of sell them into the client based around their competencies. And that's really, really interesting. It absolutely, like I said, takes the unconscious bias out, but it actually makes the playing field a little bit fairer, because what we found as well is, for example, there may be certain qualification routes that are more appealing to men than women. There may be certain qualification routes that are more appealing to different minority groups. So it's things like, we've had clients that have said, well, everybody that joins us in the senior leadership team has to have a degree from a red brick university. That's just the way that we do things. But we really want to hire more diversely. And then we can go to them with the data and say, well, actually, the people that you want that are competent to do this role don't have that degree. They haven't gone through the red brick university route, but they've got the competencies, they've got the skills, they've just taken a different qualification route to get there. And again, so that's just trying to present them with different ways of thinking about how they hire, and trying to take some of the, like we said, the bias out of hiring. Conversely, we've actually also tried the complete opposite with this, which was really, really interesting, and again, can work quite well. So what I mean by that is we tried a project where we actually got everybody that we were shortlisting for roles to do video interviews of themselves. And now you would think that this wouldn't work, because you can clearly see who that person is. You can see their gender, you can see their ethnicity and all of those sorts of stuff. You can see their age. And you would think that that would then bring the bias back in. But actually what we found is, so we used data tracking software when we were doing those videos. That meant we could see how engaged the hiring manager was with the videos. And we could see at what point they kind of stopped paying attention, or they stopped listening, or they turned off the video. And that actually allowed us to then point out some unconscious bias that they weren't aware that they had. So for example, we could say to them, well, look, we sent you 5 videos, and actually the 3 people who were, white British, you watched the videos all the way to the end. But the 2 people that weren't white British, you actually only watched 30 seconds of the videos. You didn't give them a fair shot. You haven't watched it all the way through. And it identified then the biases in the hiring process they might not have been aware of. So it may be that, we're dealing with a HR director who's really committed to diversity and they want to improve their numbers, but they're not aware that there's bias happening, with the person that this person reports into, or something like that. So it's the complete opposite way of doing it, but also quite an interesting way to identify those sorts of areas of bias. So that's a couple of ways that we can, try and take the bias out of that shortlisting process when we're getting candidates across, when, people are picking out candidates that they want to interview. But the thing is, like we said, it's not just about the interview process. It's not just about when they've actually applied. It's about the fact that sometimes people aren't even getting the applications that they need. So we've had this with a client previously where they've said to us, again, we're really, really committed to diversity at the senior end. We really want our executive team to be more diverse and to reflect more accurately our customers and the UK as a whole. But we're just not getting any women apply. It's just not happening. They're not applying for the role. So we can't even give them the chance to get through competency CV stuff or to get to interview stage. They're just not applying in the first place. And so we asked them about their process for advertising. How are they advertising these roles? How are they getting the applications in the first place? And what they said was that they actually always advertised in The Guardian. That was it. They would put an advert in The Guardian, and that was how they got their applications. So that was our immediate suggestion. Well, what we need to do is look at different advertising sources. We could be advertising in different places where women are spending more time, and they are looking and they're reading different things to perhaps some of the men are. So it was looking at putting adverts in different places. It was also looking at how the adverts are written themselves. So there's something weirdly very inherent in language, which is gender. That is strangely kind of very obvious in the way that a lot of us write. And so you'll find a lot of companies, again, they're looking for diversity, but their adverts are written in very, very masculine language. And it's off-putting. And a lot of women won't apply for it. So what we can do is we can use software to sort of run that through and to change that language to make it more gender neutral, so that people will apply from all genders. And that's quite an interesting approach as well. And something that works really, really well. It means that these people that you're trying to attract, they previously weren't even finding out about the roles. So they had no opportunity to apply, but now they're finding out about the roles. Now the language is right, it's appealing to them, and they're putting their applications in. And then, finally, the kind of one of the issues that you find from an application point of view is, again, you could have your HR department doing everything right. They are advertising in more diverse places. They are using gender neutral language. They are they're taking CVs out of the equation, and they're asking for competencies on the applications. So they're doing everything right, and they're still not getting the diverse applications that they want. What that tends to boil down to is industry perception, and that's where we've all got some work to do. So, for example, a really good example is potentially, we've had this conversation previously with some members of sort of the LGBTQIA plus community, where they don't necessarily feel comfortable applying for roles in construction because there's a stigma around the construction industry that there's, it's a boys' club, or there's a certain level of banter. So the industry itself is off-putting to them. And so, what we need to do is make sure that, like, as I sort of said earlier, is that make sure the health and safety industry is one that is seen as very, very welcoming. It's very welcoming to all walks of life. It's a very diverse industry where, those sorts of markers, like, gender or minority group or whatever it is, aren't going to be a barrier to your success. And that's something that we all have to do. This is outside of the companies. This is us as the safety industry as a whole. We need to make sure we're putting that perception out there. And how we do that is by talking more about it, having these conversations about the industry, having these conversations about diversity. So a great example there is you could look at someone like Malcolm Staves, who's the director of safety over at L'Oreal. And he's really, really proud of the work that they do, particularly from a gender perspective for diversity. And so he talks about it all the time. So he's got a really great brand on social media. He's talking about the work that they do. He's talking about the numbers in their company, because they've got a really good 50-50 split of men to women. And that is helping change the perception of not only L'Oreal, but it's helping to change the perception of the safety industry and showing that it's welcoming. So I think that's something that we all could do some work on, I think, to really, really help bring more people in. So I'm aware I've given you so much information already, but there's good news in here. There's lots of things that we can do. If you are a company that is looking to try and address, your diversity issues, there are loads and loads of things that you can do. If you are a person who's interested in this as a topic, there's loads of things that you can do personally to try and change the perception. Like we said, start talking about it, writing blog pieces, doing mentoring, all of that stuff is really, really going to help. But the key things for you as a company is looking at where you advertise your roles, making sure that the recruitment process is genuinely unbiased, and looking at your perception in the marketplace. Is the perception of health and safety attractive to the demographic you want to hire? Is the perception of your company's industry attractive to the demographic that you're looking to hire? And I think if you address all of these things, we're going to really, really see those numbers start to change a lot more, particularly at that senior end of the market, which is where we need to see the most change at the moment. So we've done the facts about what's happening in the safety industry at the moment. We've talked about why we should care. We've talked about, the bottom line, the genuine impact on the commercial aspect of a company. We've looked at how we can attract more people, how we can make sure that the recruitment process is fair. So I think we've come quite a long way so far on our D&I journey today. And hopefully you've learned a lot. But I think one of the things that's important to recognize, and I think you could pretty much ask probably any woman on this call, or in the industry that and there's probably been some point on their career journey, in an office or a work environment where they've felt excluded, or they felt overlooked, or God forbid, and I know this has happened to most women that I know, they've been treated like the tea lady when they go into a meeting, so they're there because of their knowledge and because of their experience, and then they're asked to make the tea for everybody in the group. And I imagine this happens to people with a lot of protected characteristics. This isn't just specific to women only. There are a lot of environments where we've done all the great work, we've said we're a welcoming company, we've hired correctly, but then people join and they don't feel included. And the inclusion is a really, really big part of the problem, and something that we all definitely need to address if we're going to get this journey right. Just making a commitment, to increasing the numbers of women or the numbers of LGBT or minority groups in your company isn't always enough. Diversity has to come along with inclusion, and I think that's possibly quite overlooked when we have this discussion, particularly in the safety world. And in fact, in addition to the diversity and inclusion, we also need to include the equity side of it, which definitely gets overlooked. And when you have inclusion, diversity, and equity all really, really balanced, that's when you get that true sense of belonging. And that's when those people that you've hired into your company, they feel like they belong, and they're going to stick. They're going to stay with you. But we probably have to change some things in a lot of companies to be able to get that feeling of belonging and to get that genuine match of inclusion, diversity, and equity. So a lot of people ask me, equity, what the difference is between equity and equality, because they are different. And it's quite simple. So equality is essentially you give everybody the same opportunities. So everybody is treated exactly the same. And I think that's what we used to think in D&I, is that we would make it about equality, we'd make sure that everybody is treated exactly the same. But actually that doesn't always give us the desired effect that we want, and it doesn't always help. Whereas equity is about giving everybody the opportunity that they need to succeed. And that might mean that sometimes you're giving someone more of a leg up when it comes to work in order to make them equal to everybody else. So an example that I use quite a lot when we're talking to clients is, for example, flexible hours, right, was a thing that we hadn't really seen a lot before COVID. And what that meant is it precluded a lot of women from entering the workplace or doing these sorts of roles because they had more responsibility for childcare, and they had to do school drop-offs, and they had to do school pickups, and the working hours didn't equate for that. It didn't help. So although we were saying, well, everybody's treated equally in the company, actually equal wasn't good enough, because it meant that they were at a disadvantage. They weren't able to apply for those roles. So I think sometimes equity is something that can make people feel a little bit uncomfortable, because like I said, it can mean giving people a leg up. And I think people aren't always comfortable with that idea. They want everybody to be equal. But actually what happens is you're giving them that leg up in order to make them equal. So the difference is really, really massively important, I think, and definitely something that the safety industry really, really needs to focus on if it's ever going to be a truly welcoming and diverse place to be. And I've already mentioned, the dreaded COVID word that I don't think we're getting away from for a while. We're going to be talking about it for years to come. But weirdly, the COVID pandemic really actually helped us with this, not just in the safety industry, but in multiple industries. We mentioned the flexible working thing there, the flexible hours. Definitely in the safety industry, that wasn't something most companies had before COVID. It was very, very strict, very, very prescribed hours that people had to do. Hybrid working was almost non-existent within the safety industry. It was very much you had to be on site, and you had to be on site for particular hours. And like we said, that precluded a lot of people from applying for roles and getting and doing the job to the best of their ability. And what's happened is, because of the COVID pandemic and us having to rethink the way that we did things and rethink the way that we worked, we've started to allow this flexible working. We've started to allow this hybrid working. It's become quite a big thing, particularly in the safety industry. And we absolutely, almost immediately after we started recruiting after the pandemic, saw an uptick in diverse hires, directly related to the fact that we now had these flexible working patterns. And I think the more continuation of this, the more this is going to allow that equity, and it's going to allow more women in particular to enter the workforce, or people who are carers or anything like this. It's going to make a big difference. I talk a lot about women when I talk about this stuff, because obviously I am a woman and it's quite personal to me. But when we're looking at flexible working, it's no secret that often women do pick up a large amount of the childcare and the child rearing, and they're the ones that are kind of expected to leave work to deal with a sick child or an injured child. And flexible working now not only means that those women can enter the workforce and they can go for the promotions and things like that, but it's actually helping, because it means that the men can also do that. They also have flexible working. So it's no longer just the responsibility of the women. Everybody is got that sort of more work-life balance, where men can get more involved in the childcare and things like that. So it's really proving good for everybody. And I think, the shift on focus just on work-life balance in general is good for everybody in particular, not just women. This is great for everybody involved. So finally, the last little bit I just wanted to run through is just some of the issues I think we put on ourselves in the job market. And again, like I said, I do try and focus on general diversity, but that this maybe is a little bit more specific to women, because it's something that I personally am very passionate about, and have personal experience in. So there's a very compelling statistic that's often quoted, and it's from a Hewlett-Packard internal report from a few years ago. And this statistic was that men apply for a role when they meet only 60% of the qualifications, but women apply when they meet 100% of the qualifications. And this, again, is absolutely something that anecdotally we find very, very true in the recruitment market. In the last sort of 15 years I've been doing this, I've seen this time and time again. We headhunt women for roles that we think they'd be particularly great at. And they say, oh yes, I saw that role advertised, but I didn't think I was good enough for it because I don't have X, Y, and Z. I don't have every single thing on the criteria. Now, I'm absolutely not saying here that glass ceilings don't exist, because they do. And I've spoken about glass ceilings several times at lots of different events. But I do think that sometimes we have some sort of self-limiting beliefs that create our own glass ceilings. And that's what's sometimes referred to as kind of the sticky floor situation. So a sticky floor is a self-limiting belief or self-limiting assumptions and sabotaging behaviors, really, that undermine your career professions. So there are things that maybe keep us where we are. They stop us taking that next step. They stop us applying for that next role. They stop us asking people for a raise. And again, not just specific to women, but absolutely something that I see with women a lot, in the day-to-day job of recruitment. But again, lots of ways around this. So that's good. So the major thing that I advise, like I said, women, but everyone really in the industry, is to massively face your fears with this stuff. So I've said this many times in many different presentations, but when you're looking at a role, or, you're looking for a promotion, or you're looking for a raise, people are worried about what will happen if they ask. And the worst thing that will happen if you apply for that role, or you apply for that promotion, or you ask for that raise, is that they say no. That is the absolute worst thing that's going to happen. And that doesn't really make a difference to you. You're still in the position you were in before you asked that question. If you apply for the job and you don't get the job, that's fine. You didn't have the job to start with. Nothing has changed in regards to you, but you've given it a shot. You've thrown your hat in the ring. So you have literally nothing to lose by putting yourself out there and by trying, by asking those questions, by sitting down with your bosses and saying, look, this is the stuff that I do, and I really think I need a promotion, or I really think that I would like to take this next step, and can you help me to get there? There is nothing to lose by having those conversations. Like I said, the worst case scenario is it doesn't work quite then. You dust yourself off and you carry on with your role and you try again in the future. But what might happen is you may be surprised. You may get that interview that you didn't think that you would get, or you may have that conversation with your boss and they say, absolutely, do you know what, I've been waiting for you to ask, I would love to give you some more money. Or they may say, do you know what, yeah, I don't think you're quite there for that promotion at the moment, but actually I think if we do X, Y, and Z over the next 12 months, we absolutely could get you there to that promotion. So there are so many good things that could come out of taking the chance and facing your fears and sort of putting yourself forward, and particularly from the interview perspective. You know, if you put yourself forward for a role and you get an interview and then you still don't get the role, you haven't lost anything. You've made connections along the way. You've had interview experience. You've learned how to sell yourself a little bit more. Everything is helpful to you in your career progression. And you know, the best case scenario is you like I said, you could get that job. You could apply for something that you think, well, I only hit 70% of the criteria, but let me throw my hat in the ring, and you could end up getting the job. And we have something called wild cards in our industry, and pretty much every time that we shortlist for a client, we include a wild card. And a wild card is someone that is maybe just a little bit outside of the box for them, and that may be that they don't hit the qualifications that they wanted, but I think that they absolutely could do the job. Or, you know, they maybe are from a slightly different industry, but I just think they've got a great, unique perspective on it. And I think it's not, you know, they actually end up getting the job more times than I care to remember. So it's always worth throwing yourself in for that. You know, you wouldn't believe, like I said, the amount of times that we have clients that see those wildcards and think, and they say to us, I would never have thought of approaching that person. But when I spoke to them, they had these fresh ideas. They had this diverse thinking that actually we've really been looking for. And I hadn't thought about coming at it from that way. So that's my first call to action for you guys today, is just to put yourselves out there. You know, apply for the roles, even if you're not sure. Reach out to hiring managers and recruiters and tell them why you think it could work for you, because you just genuinely never know what could happen. And that's basically what happened to me when I started out in my career. You know, I applied for my first recruitment job with absolutely no recruitment experience. I was doing sort of generic admin roles, and I saw HSE recruitment were advertising for someone, and they were looking for someone with experience, and I took a shot. And of course it was daunting, and it was, you know, it was a very scary experience. And my husband actually had to talk me into going to the interview. But I obviously had something they were looking for. I was coming with these fresh ideas and this fresh way of thinking. And that's what all of this is about. It's about getting that diverse thinking into your companies and doing things slightly differently, because that's how you stay competitive, and it's how you make more money. So hopefully I've given you quite a lot to think about over the course of the last sort of 45 minutes. We have got some time for some Q&A at the end if you have got any questions, but just a little bit of a conclusion for you here, which is, so women and minority groups and all of that are definitely better represented than they were 10 years ago. So there is good news, but there is still underrepresentation at a senior level in the health and safety industry. We're not quite there yet. Those senior roles we still have a way to go to try and sort of equal the playing field a little bit. It's a huge risk to business to not think about this. As we discussed, companies that are more gender balanced or more ethnically diverse massively outperform their competitors. They're still profitable. You're still going to be in business in 10 years' time. You're going to be the company with those diverse ways of thinking. So to not look at diversity and inclusion is just a massive business risk, in my opinion. Well, and in many people's opinions, including McKinsey. We absolutely need to address the bias in the recruitment process. So we need to look at the ways that we're hiring, and sometimes that can be uncomfortable. You know, we have to have real hard looks at how we're doing things, and is there unconscious bias in what we're doing, and can we do this differently, and can we write things slightly differently and appeal to people slightly differently. So I think there's a lot of self-reflection that we need to do. We need to make sure we're creating those inclusive and equitable cultures, so that when we do all the right things and we attract the right people and we get them to join us, that they're not then leaving because they don't feel included. And then we absolutely all need to stand up and be counted in the industry. You know, we need to stand up, we need to have these conversations, we need to be open about diversity in our industries, we need to be open about what we're looking for and how we're doing things. We need to be confident in our own abilities. We need to say yes to things, face your fears, throw yourselves out there and try different roles. And all of this all together is absolutely going to make a huge difference. And if you think we've come far in the last 10 years, just think where we could be in the next 10 years. So, thank you very much.